Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Kate. I'm so glad that you're here with me tonight, and I have a very special and important guest. I have a real live bishop, our own Right Reverend Franklin Brookhart Jr., ninth Bishop of Montana, and now, thanks be to God, a parishioner here at St. James in the City. Welcome, Bishop Frank.
Well, thank you, Kate. It's an honor to be with you. And let's start out things right.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to put on a mitre.
No. It's a Dodgers hat.
I love it. Yes, congratulations. You know, this interview this week was in jeopardy, right? Because it might have been that there was a game tonight. And then that would have really tested our friendship, I think, wouldn't it?
It would have been first things first, yes.
So we were so lucky that they won last night. I knew that they had won because the fireworks started going off all over my neighborhood.
Yes,
very
same
exciting.
Here.
Congrats!
Yeah, we live here in Culver City, and we had a lot of fireworks here as well.
Yeah. Now, were you always a Dodgers fan, or is this a new allegiance since you've moved to LA?
It's a new one. I've always loved baseball. I'm a very poor athlete myself. I'm way too awkward, and I don't have very much depth perception. So it's a disaster when I play baseball, but I've always loved it. And I've just always sort of followed the nearest National League team. So when we moved here, obviously it's the Dodgers that got my
I know.
allegiance.
And what a perfect year a perfect time to arrive because they've done so well. So you've been here. You've been here maybe a year?
2 years.
Has it been 2 years?
Almost. Let me see. November of 2018. So it's been almost 2 years.
Yeah.
A year and 11 months.
Yeah. So that's great. And we're going to hear all about that, but I just want to scroll back in time and just sort of hear a little bit of where you're from and what part of the country. I know you've traveled around a lot through your work, but are you originally from West Virginia?
Yes, I am. That's where I was born, in a town called Parkersburg on the Ohio River. And there are 3 towns right close together in Ohio and West Virginia. The little town of Belpre, where my parents lived. And then down the road, Marietta, which some people may have heard of that. Actually, David McCulloch wrote a book recently about Marietta that's really good. They're very old towns by that standards of that part of the world. 1789.
Oh yeah, very old.
The oldest part of the old Northwest Territory. So I grew up in Parkersburg and Belpre, back and forth. I went to Belpre schools, but I went to church in West Virginia, and my dad worked for the DuPont company in West Virginia. That's where you went for entertainment and shopping, and I had good friends on both sides of the river. I think probably the best way to describe who I am would be to say that I'm an Appalachian person.
Yes.
With that very distinct and I think wonderful culture. It certainly has served me well. And I think that's your cultural background too, if I'm
100%. My mother's family is from Hendersonville, North Carolina, and my dad's family is from Eastern Kentucky, and so they met. She grew up in Kentucky too, so Kentucky is definitely feels like my ancestral home, the place where the food tastes best and things are the most beautiful. But neither of us has a Southern accent. Speaking of Southern food, I have to say we had the best dinner. We were at a conference, both of us, this past January in
Atlanta.
in Atlanta, and we had some serious Southern food. It was great.
What was the name of that place? Mother Mom's or Mother Max or
It
something
was
like
something
that.
like that. It was just my childhood on a plate. But let's
Yeah.
hear a little bit more. What was it like growing up for you? I mean, were you an Episcopalian? Was your family
Mhm.
religious? No?
Yeah, very very
Yeah?
religious, but not Episcopalian. That happened when I
Mhm.
was an adult. Uh, uh, my roots are in the Methodist Church and in the Lutheran
Mhm.
Church. That
Mhm.
kind of double track uh, approach, and I still carry uh,
Mm.
parts of that are valuable. The Methodist part with the heartfelt religion, um,
Yeah.
and from the Lutheran background, a a desire to be clear and consistent about my theology. But
Mhm.
the Episcopal Church is a great place to work those out. The Episcopal
Mhm.
Church has been nothing but a blessing for me and for
Yes.
my family.
How did you discover the Episcopal Church?
By attending them, I guess. Uh,
Mhm.
my parents actually joined an Episcopal church before I
Mhm.
did, and they kept telling me wonderful things about this. And so when I was back home, I went with them, and
Mhm.
they were right. And eventually, that their congregation are the ones who sponsored me for ordination.
Oh,
This
that's
is the church.
wonderful.
This is the Church of the Good Shepherd in Parkersburg, West Virginia.
That's wonderful. So it sounds like between the Methodists and the Lutherans and the Episcopalians, you had a couple of different kinds of experiences with
Mm-hmm.
faith tradition. So have you have you always known that you wanted to become an Episcopal priest, or did you have a prior adult life to this vocation?
Oh well, I have two sisters and a brother. My little sister and little brother are a great deal younger than my other sister and I. But we used to play church
Did you
when we
really?
were little, and I was always the preacher, and she played the piano. Um,
Aw.
and church was an important part of, and it was not just church. It was a relationship with Jesus that
Yeah.
um, was uh, clearly the priority. I
Mhm.
remember being an early teenager, and my dad came up to me one time and he said, "Now, I don't care where you've been on Saturday night or how late you come in, just know that you are going to go to church on Sunday morning."
Ha ha
And that
ha.
was sort of a sense of the priority of it.
Hmm. I
The
mean,
sense,
I know that it's not like that anymore, that in most families, it's rare, I think, these days in families for parents to force their children to go to church on a Sunday morning. But I think something's lost, just that exposure.
well, that was a less complicated world.
Yeah.
Uh, in that Appalachian culture, Sundays were still sort of
The whole day. Yeah.
sacrosanct, and
Yes.
nothing really went on that would interfere
Hmm.
with it.
Hmm.
Um, I remember for me, the turning
Hmm.
point came in the 1970s, and I was serving a church in the Cleveland area. And I got a letter from the YMCA telling me that they were going to begin scheduling soccer practice on Sunday mornings. And that was, in my memory, a kind of turning point.
I
And I wrote him a
agree.
letter.
It was.
I wrote a
Yeah.
letter
It
back saying, "What about uh, the C in YMCA?" And not long after that, the Y dropped the whole MCA from their name. It's just now the Y. Um, but there's so many other options
Hmm.
of a Sunday. When I was a kid growing up, for instance, you couldn't get groceries on a Sunday. The stores were shut. And that's
Yeah.
all completely different now. So it was a less
Right.
complicated world, and
Yeah.
priorities were a little easier. But it still is a matter of priority, isn't it?
Right. It was a less
What is important
complicated
for your
world.
kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's
But
important for your kids?
but back in those days, I think uh, the culture supported the
Yes.
idea of Sunday being special. And now the culture has no interest whatsoever in Sunday being special.
Mm-mm.
And so
No,
that's the difference, I think.
the little town I grew up in my class, there were 130 of us. Um, every single person went to church nearly every Sunday,
Yeah.
except for
Yeah.
one kid named Dickie Lee, and Dickie got made fun of because he didn't go to church. And
Unbelievable.
boy, is that different than it is now.
We're there's some people in the chat, and Iffy says I can relate to that. Church attendance was not an option. Yeah, and I think
No.
a lot of our parishioners who grew up in different countries in Africa know that it was not an option, and Korea too. It just was not. Yeah, that's just what you did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so so anyway, but you were talking about how you had these younger siblings and these older siblings, and you played church when you were little. So you think that the idea was germinating even then.
Yeah, the actual turning point came when I was in high school. I
Mm-hmm.
was 16. I we went that night to a Good Friday liturgy, and that was a time when I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it's an age appropriate question for
Yeah.
someone that age. And I knew I wanted to do uh, something. The way I said it is, I wanted to do something important,
Hmm.
and it came to me in the middle of that service that serving in the church was what I could do. Now,
Mm.
my parents had other plans for me.
What did they
They
want?
well, they wanted me to be a physician. They wanted me to, my son, the doctor. And
Yeah.
I can think of hardly anything I'd less like to do than be a physician. And I'd been pretty clear with them. And they, well, how about being a dentist? And I said, no, I don't want to spend my life in someone else's mouth. No, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
Um, but they accepted it and were supportive of it, particularly my dad.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, particularly your dad. That's great. That's really great that you felt their support,
Mm-hmm.
even though it wasn't. So does that mean that when you went to college as an undergrad, you already knew that you would become an Episcopal priest?
Yes and no. At that point, it was experimenting with a
Mhm.
vocation,
Mhm.
and there were parts of it that I knew I would like, and there were parts of it that I just didn't know whether I could do it or not,
Yeah.
um, whether I was capable.
What was the
Well,
part that you
you
thought
know,
that you wondered about? Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, you have to test it out. And if there are things that you don't know if you'll be able to do, you have to find out and try to learn.
in college, I was an English major, and uh, I'd written a paper for one course, and at the paper, at the bottom of the paper, the professor said, "Please come and talk with me." And I thought, "What the devil's
Mhm.
up here?" So I went to talk with him, and he said, "I think you ought to go to graduate school um, to become an English professor." Um,
Oh, I could see
and
that.
he and I chatted about that. Part of the fun of that is he later became a parishioner of mine,
Oh.
and a much loved friend. He's gone on to his great reward now, but uh,
Mhm.
that was in the background. That I
Yeah.
knew I would be good at,
That part, the
and I
writing
continued that.
and
Oh
mhm.
yeah, the writing and reading; those are things I just
Mhm.
love to do.
Yeah.
Uh, it continued through seminary, and as a senior in the seminary, it got to be kind of a mental and emotional crisis. I've got to say, am I going to seek ordination at this point, or am I going to put things on hold?
Why? What was causing that question?
Well, the same question.
Mm-hmm.
Would I be good at this?
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote some people who knew me and my work, and some of them wrote back and said, "Well, you'll have to make that decision yourself." And others wrote back and said, "It would be a shame if you didn't proceed
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
ordination." So that's what happened.
Mm.
And the first church I served was a mission church on the east side of
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland. It was rough going.
Mm-hmm.
When I got there, one of the pillars of the church, named Rose, said, "Frank, when we were considering calling someone, we had to think whether we were going to close this church or call you." And I went,
Oh, wow.
"Oh boy, have we got into it now?"
That was your first? That
That
was your
was my
first church?
first church.
Oh,
And,
boy.
when I was 25 years old, I probably should have paid them to put up with me rather than paying me.
No.
Um,
Well,
looking back,
you
some of
got
the
to practice.
stupid things I did.
You
Uh,
practiced on them.
yes, I wish more churches had a sense that not just with inexperienced clergy, but part of what makes great priests are congregations nurturing that.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Sorry.
my guess, Kate, is that you sense that St. James nurtures you along and brings out the best in you. Now, one of the churches I served, second church I served, I say that it was an unintentional interim of 2.5 years. I was in trouble the first month, and knew it. And there are churches like that are really clergy killer places. About the second Sunday I was there, I was greeting people after church, shaking hands and saying hello and that. And one of the old timers at church came up to me and said, "You don't shake hands here. You shake hands over there." And I said, "No, I shake hands here." And that was how things started. So
Yeah.
I was glad to leave, and they were glad to see me
Mhm.
leave. And I accomplished some things, I think, but I think I made some um, strategic errors in dealing with those people.
I think
And
that any
that was in
church,
Western Ohio.
I think
Go
any
ahead, please.
church that we serve is teaching us things one way
Mhm.
or another. But it is wonderful when you come upon a congregation that sees themselves as a sort of a teaching congregation where they delight in sort of raising people up and encouraging. When I started my career, my church. I was just a deacon. I was their deacon before I was their priest, and they taught me everything, and it was so beautiful to have them say, "This is how you do a baptism." I mean, they knew, the servers knew as well as I did, and so they delighted in sharing their work with me.
Mhm.
I love it when that happens, and I hope that St. James can be that kind of a place where we're always learning from each other. We have a deep bench of knowledgeable people. I see John Thies is in the chat. Christy Flake is in the chat. Reward is in the chat. I mean, these are wise people. Jim Buenamani's in the chat. People and
Mhm.
Comfort um, who know so much about the faith life and about how to be a church traveling together. So I'm hearing you say Cleveland. And
and then Western Ohio. But
Western Ohio.
before we go on,
Yeah.
let me say you've mentioned those names, and I know those people.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, we've talked. We've said, churches that nurture clergy. They're almost like
Yes.
teaching hospitals. Like that.
Yes.
Where it's. I would want to emphasize that that's the way God works. It's through people who care, uh, who have a sense of emotional support and can say the right thing at the right time.
Mm.
Um, One of the churches I served was the third church I served. Yeah, was an academic church. It was a town and gown church, and it was in Ohio, Springfield, Ohio, which is a town between Dayton and Columbus. It's the town that I went to college in, and about half of my church were former professors. You talk about
Mm.
an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And they loved to talk, and they loved to discuss, and they loved to kind of play push and tug with each other. And we had a member who was professor of biology, and the man had an absolute gift of
Mm.
knowing when to stand up in a meeting and say just the right thing to bring people together. His name
Mm.
was he died here years ago. His name was Lou Laux. And when Lou would stand up, I would say to myself, "Thank you, Jesus. This is going to be." He
Yeah.
was one of those uh, people that God consistently worked through. So to those people you've mentioned, and to many others, I would want them to see themselves uh, as who they are, which is agents,
Mm.
ambassadors, to use
Mm.
Paul's language, um, the baptized, the people
Yeah.
uh, who do God's work in the church and in the world.
Yes. In the church and in the world. Yes, Justin was saying something about that to me just before we started. He was working with someone on audiovisual stuff today, and he said he ended up counseling that person. And it's just sort
Mhm.
of what we do as Christians. And I see that Reward is actually asking a question about the churches that you were serving in that time. She says, were they segregated?
No,
No, they weren't.
no. Let me think. No, they were not segregated. They were integrated churches. I always served churches that had the second church I served, the one where I had so much trouble. That was a totally white, lower middle class town.
Hmm.
And it was an unusual church in that it was a large congregation in a small town. That usually doesn't work that way. But
Mm.
the other churches I served always had
Hmm.
integrated congregations, a mixture of social classes,
Hmm.
um, a mixture of gay and straight. Um,
Hmm.
and that's just what
Reward
happened when I
is
was.
picking up in the chat. Reward is picking up on that idea about how we nurture each other. And she says nurturing should be ongoing in our churches and also be part of our lives, eternal. Yeah. So so you were a priest. Were you married? You and Sue married at this point?
Yes. Um, she and I were married right after seminary.
Uh-huh.
She's from Philadelphia, where I was going to seminary at that point. We've been married now 46 years, and it's been a great 46
Congratulations.
years.
You're a great couple. Congratulations. So you were a priest for many years in all of these different kinds of churches, and then somehow or other you became a bishop, and I'm curious about that. I have a friend.
Mhm.
named Sam who received a call. He knew he wanted to be a bishop, that he was being called to be a bishop in Massachusetts, and he ran for election, but he wasn't elected. But that call remained, and now he is a bishop in North Carolina. And it was interesting to watch a friend receive a call to become a bishop. And I wonder, was it like that for you? Was there something about the work of being a bishop that started to sort of stir in you and make you seek it out, or did it come and get you, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was more of that. Excuse me, Kate. I had never, because of my particular story, had never had seen myself as being on a list of candidates. That always seemed not possible.
Wait. Why in the world would you say that?
Well, one of the things is, and I'll have to be blunt about it, is being from West Virginia.
Really?
Being an Appalachian person is one of the few things left in our culture where it's still acceptable to make fun of people. Hillbillies, ridge
Oh,
runners,
yeah. Oh,
and
absolutely.
Jed Clampett and all those images. And there were certain people that would approach me, and I knew right away what they were thinking. And I have all my own teeth. I wear shoes, and I am not married to my cousin. And they kind of laugh uncomfortably, but there are those images that I got refusal letters, and I know that they got no further than seeing my name, Diocese of West Virginia.
Wow.
That's one of the factors.
Yeah.
I knew that the Diocese of Montana was looking for a bishop, and I knew some of the story there. My predecessor was removed from office. The allegations was sexual misconduct, having an affair in Kentucky, by the way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that was what they got him on, so to speak. But it was sort of the real issue was his leadership, capricious, narcissistic. The affairs continued. He was not tried for them, but I certainly knew stories about what had gone on. So it was a troubled place, and all the churches I had ever served, my whole career has been as a troubleshooter. And so I thought, here's another troubleshooter place. And I called one of my good friends who was the rector of one of the churches in Montana. And he said, that's interesting because I've been thinking about nominating you. And I said, well, go ahead and do that. So he did. And they went through their nominating process.
Sorry.
And I took it seriously. I tried to do, they wanted a tape interview and written questions and all that stuff. And I took it seriously and tried to put a good foot forward. And one Saturday afternoon, Sue and I were in the Walmart parking lot getting ready to go home. And I got a call from the chair of the search committee in Montana saying, you're one of the finalists. I said, oh, thank you very much. That's a really nice honor, and I appreciate it, and hung up. And I said to Sue, I just can't see this. When I pray about this, it's simply a blank wall. And I think for their sake and for mine, I really need to turn them down. Oh,
because of what you were not hearing in your prayers.
It was just blank wall. And Sue said, no, 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 you're not. You're going to continue. You're going to do your best, and you will be elected. And I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, God told me. Now, if you know Sue, that's not her normal language, but it was one of those senses in her mind. As it turns out, I found some people in the church I was serving had that sense as well, that it was going to happen. So, I was one of five, and I went around saying, I've got a 20% chance, and that's not much of a chance. So don't get worked up about this. So they had their convention, and their interim bishop was a wonderful man named Charles Kaiser. And Charles had been the bishop for the armed forces.
Mm.
And he is from South Carolina, North Carolina. No, Georgia. Let me take that back. He's from Florida. That's where he's really from. And he called me up, Frank. I was outside detailing my car, and I had switched the phone over to my cell phone, and I was in on the front seat polishing something, and he called up and said, Frank, are you on your knees? I said, well, as a matter of fact, Bishop, I am. And he told me that I'd been elected. So it came as a surprise to me.
But not to Sue. Not to Sue.
Not to Sue. And she made a huge gift and gesture to me to do this. We were in Wheeling, West Virginia at that point. I'd been the rector of this church for over 17 years.
Okay.
And it was, when people would say, well, if you're not elected here in Montana, what are you going to do? And I'd say, I'd go back to Wheeling, West Virginia and be perfectly happy. Wheeling always felt very much like home to me.
Mm.
And people would ask during that process, Kate, do you feel called to be the bishop of Montana? And my answer was, no. I don't think it's about my feeling. I said, calls come through processes, and if I am elected, that will be a call, and then I'll tell you I've been called, but otherwise I won't know.
So it's an ongoing sort of a cumulative process, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And I was Bishop of Montana I was in my 17th year.
Really? I didn't realize you'd been there that long.
Well, yeah, most bishops don't last that long. It's about a 10-year stretch for many people.
Oh my gosh, so much work. By the way, we have someone in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat down the right-hand side of your screen, but we have a fellow named Dr. Greg Dern, and he's living in Montana right now. He says, hello from north central Montana, south of M River. And he says, St. James in the City's been my parish since the 80s, and now St. James Lewiston is the closest parish to me. He says, you were a beloved bishop, and I can't wait to meet you. So
what's
you
the
have
name
a fan.
Again?
His name is Dr. Greg Dern, and I think he went to Montana around the same time that you left, so you haven't met him yet.
Oh, okay. But he's in Lewistown. Yeah, Lewistown's it's becoming a retirement place. It's a very pleasant town. It's in what's called the Judith Basin. It's the center for sapphires, for sapphire mining.
Well, I'm glad that we're on to talking about Montana now, because I'm very curious, and I know other people are too, about what it would be like to be the bishop of a place like Montana. You've already said you were there 17 years. Bishops usually last 10 because it's grueling work anywhere.
Yeah,
and it's really, really hard work. I know that it is. What was it like being bishop in Montana specifically?
Well, as I said, my predecessor had been removed, so I inherited a diocese with a vast amount of
trauma, I'm sure.
Well, it was an abused family. he had
Yes.
abused in one way or another nearly every church, well, every church in the diocese. And early on, I went to a family psychologist and I said, I've got this diocese abused family. How do I deal with them? And we chatted about it, but his answer basically was always be honest and always be transparent.
Yeah.
And that's what we tried to do. The first 6 or 8 years was a matter of overcoming that distrust, dislike. First rounds of visitations, I was able to visit all of our churches in slightly more than a year. Um,
That
and
is
that
an
first round of
accomplishment
visit,
right there. That's a lot of
well,
driving.
it's a lot of driving. Montana is a huge state geographically, demographically small, about 1 million people, but it's a huge state. As I tell people, to drive from diagonally across the state is the same as driving from Chicago to Baltimore. And so I was on the road a lot. And as much as anything, that's what wore me out, was just the
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah. I'm
But
sure.
that first round of visitations, and for the next first round, it was sort of, who the hell are you and what are you doing here? I'd go to bishops' meetings, new bishops, and they'd say, always nice when you go and visit places. They greet you and give you gifts. And I thought to myself, no, they don't do that.
But they just kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It was that sort of, let's see about you.
Is that a Montana thing as well?
It
Is there
can be.
any part of the Montana sort of style that's slow to warm up? I don't know. I don't know anything about Montana.
They can. It depends on where you are. As I said, it's a huge state. The traditional culture is rural. Your nearest neighbor may be 50 miles away. So that sense of sort of
That's
independence.
mind-blowing, actually, isn't it? Your closest
Well,
neighbor
oh
might be
yeah,
50 miles away. For those of us living in
yeah.
Los Angeles, where we're so close together.
Well, it's still like that. I mean, literally, there are people who drive 50 miles to go to McDonald's to get a cup of coffee. That's a fun morning to do that. The culture, so there is a kind of libertarian streak because of some of that. The climate can be wonderful, but it can also be extraordinarily harsh.
What did you drive? What was your vehicle for all of
I
this
drove an
traversing?
SUV.
Mhm.
I drove a Dodge SUV
Mhm.
or a Chevy Trailblazer.
With the snow
Um,
tires in the winter, or were they all-wheel
it,
drive?
it had to be all-wheel drive.
Yeah,
I never
yeah.
had too much trouble, although in bad weather, I had an emergency kit I kept in the back of the truck, a blanket
Mhm.
and sterno and some, granola bars and things like that in case I got stuck.
When we
There
were
were
when we
parts.
were you told us once that your staff calculated how far you had driven during the
Mhm.
time that you were Bishop of Montana. Can you tell us what they figured out it was?
Yeah, when I was retiring, one of the groups they gave me a very very lovely and very nice uh, party, and one of the groups came up with a plaque and had a big tire tread on it. They had calculated that I had driven the distance to the moon and back in my 17 years there.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and you'd go through. I had a Sirius XM radio and CDs.
Mhm.
It was great time to think. It was great time to
Mhm.
pray.
Yes.
Um, so I didn't uh, mind. I took my dog with me most of the time.
Oh, nice.
Lizzie, who was as much Lizzie was a Springer Spaniel,
Mm.
and she was much loved. She had a staff position She she was her title was Canine to the Ordinary, and
Oh.
she was given that title by the chancellor. She had her picture of her on the staff page, and
Oh, I
she
love it.
went with me most paces, as my current dog Jimmy does now.
Hmm.
And I remember one crusty older woman one Sunday came up. "Where's your dog?" And I said, "Well, I left her at home." She said, "Too bad." I said, "I like you, but I like your dog better." So that's where things that's where things stood.
And didn't you tell me one time too that that people there could just be so honest. If they didn't like something you said at convention, it
Oh,
could be
they get
there
them
was a
walk out.
bluntness. Yeah, there was a
Yeah, they get them
bluntness.
walk out. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a real bluntness um, that is difficult to deal with. One of the first things I had to deal with on arriving there was really sending out notices saying, "When you call me, don't yell at me over the phone."
You had to
Um,
ask people not to yell at you?
yes, don't yell at me. This is not even polite behavior, let alone the way Christians treat each other. They got the point pretty quickly on that front. Uh, they had been uh, they were modeling what they had received,
Yeah.
and it was easy enough to change that.
So what was the biggest challenge about those 17 years and the greatest
Well,
joy?
well there were several things that needed to happen. The first one was dealing with the trust and the dysfunction
Yeah.
of the diocese. And I knew that I had to be out and about as much as I could. Early on, I established 2 offices in different parts of the diocese. That didn't need to
Oh.
continue for very long. But I also knew that I needed to simply listen a lot without commenting too much.
Mhm.
Um, I needed to make clear where I stood on things. We had a big retreat with the diocesan council and the standing committee,
Mhm.
um, led by a professional uh, leader, and we
Mhm.
developed some standards of what do we call it? Expectations of adult members of the diocese.
Civility, right?
Yeah, it was. I think I said let's make it 10, so it's like 10 commandments. But it was things like be civil,
Mm.
uh, pray for the bishop, and pray for your rector. Um,
Yeah.
be supportive. There were all kinds of things like
Mm.
that, and we made it into a bookmark and spread it
Mm.
all over the diocese. And that was one small step, one of the little things we
Mm.
did. Eventually, about 7 or 8 years in, I had the sense that I was finally the bishop. Then there were some other things that needed to be addressed. Early on, we had to deal with some financial matters.
Mhm.
Uh, the first convention that I presided over, in my address, I said, "This is politically a really stupid thing to begin with, but we've got to talk about money."
Mm.
Half the congregations in the diocese were supported by the diocese. And it was real clear to me from looking at the budget and the endowments and like that this
Mm.
could not continue. Furthermore, I also knew from reading in my own 30 years of
Mhm.
experience in the parish, one of which was with a supported church, that one of the surest ways to stunt
Mhm.
congregation and to ensure that it is at stasis is to give it money. So that first year, we uh, eliminated assisted congregations.
Wow.
We did it in a 5-year, 6-year plan, actually. and I made sure we had a stewardship expert come in and talk with, who went around the
Mm,
entire diocese. And
mhm.
he had developed for us a kind of cookbook stewardship campaign, start on page 1 and write this letter, that sort of thing.
That's lovely. It sounds like they just needed that. They needed to know how to do that.
Yeah. And the
They've been
congregations that,
wards of the state for so long,
yeah, they've
right?
been wards, and they had sob stories and
Yeah.
all kinds of things,
I'm
but
sure it
the
was a
congregations,
scary experience. Yeah.
yeah, for all of us.
Yeah.
But uh, the congregations that stepped up did well with it. The ones that didn't uh, asked to be closed eventually. But it
Mm.
was a stronger diocese as a result. So financial matters is one of the things we had to deal with. Getting the church camp in order.
Hmm.
Um, that was over the whole 17 years. We had to rework the director's job description, where he lived, refinancing, how to. They had the strangest system for finances, and then
Hmm.
eventually a capital fund drive to
Yeah.
renovate facilities. That was
Yeah.
kind of the
Boy, if
last
there's
big
a if
thing
there's
of
a diocese that should have a gorgeous summer camp, it would be Montana.
that. And it does. Camp Marshall, right
Yeah.
on the shores of the Flathead Lake.
The beauty that you must have seen in all of
Mhm.
your traveling from place to place. I mean, there's nothing like it, is there? Gorgeous.
No, if there were places, oh, good, I get to drive this place and see this and that.
Hmm.
Um, it was that was good. We had to
Did you
work
wear
on.
cowboy boots?
No, no.
No?
I bought
Oh,
a pair of
okay.
cowboy boots once and tried them on.
Mhm.
Thought, how in the world do people walk in these things?
They do. Those
So I
pointy
took them.
toes.
I took them back to the store and I said, I can't wear these.
Oh,
We had to
wow.
deal with the deacons, getting the
Yeah.
diaconal ministry in order. Uh, so we had camp, the deacons, the finances. There are
So
11,
many
not
things.
11, 7 major Indian reservations in Montana, and the
Mhm.
diocese had never done any Native American work. So we
Oh,
had to work
wow.
on that, and
Yeah.
eventually got an assistant bishop, Carol Gallagher, who is a Native person
Mhm.
herself, who was there for a couple of years near the end of my time. She is now, by the way, in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
Um, those were some of the things. I felt very good about
Mm.
the
Yeah,
17
it
years and
sounds
getting a
like
lot done.
talk about troubleshooting. So the first 7 or 8 years, just building trust and healing wounds, and then the next decade, building up,
Building
right?
up. Um, that's not to say there's a lot of work left to do.
Yeah.
My successor is named Marty Stebbins, who seems to be doing a fine job. I'm pleased that they
That's
did
great.
their process, and
Yeah.
she comes from North Carolina, and before that had been a
Oh,
veterinarian. And I
interesting.
think she's enjoying
Yeah, the
the place.
outdoor
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So, at the end of the 17 years, you and Sue made the decision to move here to Los Angeles, and I think it was
Mhm.
because your daughter, and her wife were having a baby, right? Or had a baby at
Yeah,
that point?
yeah,
Rowan was
that's right.
born already, right?
Well,
So
Rowan was on the way at that point.
oh,
Yeah,
he was on the
we have
way, okay,
we have 2 daughters. Carol and her husband Sean live in Helena, Montana.
okay.
Um, and our younger daughter Rachel is married to Amanda Carmichael, and they have a son named Rowan
Mhm.
Brookhart Carmichael.
Very
Um,
fine name. Wow, that's a great
yeah, it
name.
is. Um, they
Mhm.
Rachel, who is Rachel. She called up one day and said, Dad, we're not going to name him Franklin because that's an ugly name. So, oh, okay.
Oof. It's not.
That's
It's a
my
great
daughter.
name.
Um, So we moved here to be close to them, and in fact are. It's about a
Yeah.
15-minute walk.
Mhm.
And Rowan has reached an age where he's able to spend the night with us. And
Well,
he
I
and
want to go
his
back to when you
Grammy.
first.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to when you first arrived.
Mhm.
I know that he was baptized at All Saints Beverly Hills, and I don't think you'd quite decided where you were going to be yet, but maybe there. And I am going to be forever grateful to our beloved Reverend Betsy Anderson, because she said, "Why not come and visit St. James?" And I'm so glad that she did, because oh my goodness, now we have you and Sue in our midst, and you're so you give us so much. I mean, for one thing, for those of you who don't know, Bishop Frank is a great and kind and loving support to me, and so it's so nice to have your friendship, and also I know you're also a support to Father John, and that he loves all that he learns from you, and I know that you and John Thies like to smoke cigars together and talk about liturgy, and you have all these relationships. Oh, is that a secret? Which part? I'm sorry. Yeah. So anyway, just you're
John's an
becoming.
iffy character, so you have to watch him.
I know, a little dodgy. I know he's in the chat right now. And by the way, we have to
Hi,
toggle
John.
back to Montana for 1 second, because Reward wants to know if the people in Montana wore their guns to church as part of their dressing. She said, "I hope not."
Yes.
They did.
We went through a spell where people were saying, Bishop, I got my gun, and if there's a trouble, I'll take care of it. And
Mhm.
I had to say, by resolution of the General Convention, every Episcopal church is a gun-free zone. Leave your guns at home. So I know there were some people who carried them. I only actually saw it once. I mean, where the person pulled back their coat and there was the revolver. But yeah,
Very interesting.
that's an
Interesting.
issue there. It's an
Yeah,
issue
yeah,
everywhere. I mean, gun control.
yeah.
I have never been a kind of demonstrator type. Let's have a demonstration in the streets.
Hmm.
And I have never been a person who uh, thought that making quote prophetic statements from the pulpit is helpful or even appropriate. I mean, that's a rough and very dangerous edge to walk. And I'm very grateful that you and I think, share the same philosophy on that. But what I would do was I met with our senators and congressmen. I'd go to Washington on occasion and meet with them.
Hmm.
And the two things I tried to talk with them about was health insurance and gun
And gun
control.
control. Yeah,
And if I were
I
to do
believe
it again,
it.
and
Hmm.
to meet with our representative, my personal
Hmm.
representative here is Karen Bass, or
Hmm.
either of our senators, I would say, please be at work on those two things, because
Yeah.
lack of health care and guns, those two factors are killing us.
Yeah. So Reward brought us to that topic, but now I want to whip back again. We were talking about Rowan's having sleepovers at your house, and how fun that must be for you all to be
He he
grandparents.
he is a sweet, bright kid. He is super active. Um, he runs. He's in almost constant motion. Um, he plays with a lot of toys. He bangs around on the piano downstairs. Um, but he's a great guy, and
Mm.
we're very proud of him, and we enjoy having him around.
Do you like being in Los Angeles?
Yes, I do. Um, I don't like being confined here at home so much. I feel like I'm
Yeah,
missing a lot. But
I
Sue and
know.
I have enjoyed being in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
I enjoy being able to get up, uh, as I did yesterday morning or this morning, and going downstairs. Gemma gets me up at about 6 o'clock, but I go
Mhm.
downstairs and make coffee and tea for myself and go out into the backyard and drink tea and wait for the day to start.
Mhm.
While I'm doing that, there's 20 inches of snow in Montana. So
Yeah.
that's part of just the wonderful climate. And then there's so many
Mm.
amazing
Bird. Mm.
things, cultural opportunities, interesting people. Um,
I know.
it,
I mean,
it,
I know that before the pandemic, you and Sue were faithfully coming to Even Songs at St. James and the LACMA
oh yeah,
Sundays live program and the organ recitals and all that richness. Thanks to Jim Buenamani, who, by the way, says thank you because you're a wonderful support to the music program at St. James too. Another reason
mm,
that we're glad that you're with us. And maybe people don't know that Sue is an organist. Your wife is an
yeah. She
organist.
is. That's her avocation. She actually was the cathedral organist in Helena for
Yeah.
about 10 years or so. And part of what we enjoy about St. James is really the superlative
Mm.
music that Jim uh, enables, provides.
Yeah.
Um,
It's amazing.
he is I think he's a genius, and we have a choir that is. And I've been all over the world and
Yeah.
listening to choirs. I love to sing in a choir. Haven't for years. My voice is not much anymore, but um, I don't know of a choir that's any better than the St. James Choir. And both Jim and Tom Mueller are just superb organists.
Yeah.
And with that stunning organ that we have, it
Mm.
is like a trip to heaven and back almost every Sunday. So thank you, Jim.
Ah, amen. Yes, thank you, Jim. It is a trip to heaven and back every Sunday. You know, we I think it was last week we rebroadcast. Was it last week or the week before we rebroadcast an Even song from 2019? And just remembering how exquisite those services are and how meaningful they are.
Who chooses the hymns, Kate? Do you or Jim?
Oh, Jim does. Jim does.
Well,
I
that's
mean, every
another thing.
once in a while
We
he'll he he when I tell him about ones that are very, very dear to me, he always includes them. But he's also a genius at that. What were you going to
well,
suggest?
we just sing the best hymns. I
Oh, I
mean, there are
know, the
hymns, and then there
best.
are hymns. Boy, do we do it well on that front. Um,
Yes.
it is uh, music and liturgy both
Yeah.
that carry our praise and our glorification of God very well.
Mm.
I think it's extremely important that the praise and glorification of God are basic to our faith.
Mm.
Um, this is, you start in the Old Testament with this, blessed be God is the beginning of everything. And by saying that, we're getting ourselves in the right place in life, that God is God and I am not. And when it requires effort to provide music and liturgy that can carry and express the worship of people at a deep level. Now
Mm.
we could sit around and hum tunes and things like that, and that would be worship. But at least for me, that wouldn't carry very much. That doesn't carry very much. But
Mm.
what the liturgy and the music at St. James um, just um, lifts me up, blesses me,
Mm.
and allows the Lord Jesus to enter into my life in deep ways. I'm very grateful for that. And there are a couple of other things, Kate, that I would want to point to people. One is the excellence of the preaching at St. James. I would question the people who are listening to see, when was the last time you heard a bad sermon at St. James? Been a long time. The excellence of preaching, that it is a serious wrestling with Scripture and a serious wrestling with the human condition, with where we live. When you bring those two things together, sparks are going to fly. And Kate, you and John, I think, do that very well. And I don't think I could stand bad preaching at this point in my life. I've had to put up with enough of it as it is. I don't have to put up with anything anymore. But
that's right, you don't.
Thank you, and Father John, for that. And it's always fun discussing the sermons before they happen. Sometimes you and sometimes John.
Oh yeah, I called
with me
first
about this or that. What do you think about this or that?
What did I? Oh, I called you the other day and I said, let's talk about angels. Please,
and I said,
SOS,
I don't think much about them.
I know,
and
but it was a good conversation.
The other great factor about St. James is it takes its outreach to the community seriously. And there is some intense ministry that goes on by the people of St. James.
It's very deep work and it's very relational work. It's not just here's your food. It's friendships.
Mm-hmm. Those four things: music, the liturgy, preaching, and outreach, are four things about St. James that I would want to challenge the people at St. James to consider and take seriously. And I think they can do two things about that. One is to follow your advice and link up with some of their friends who are not churched.
Yeah.
And say, we got some good stuff going on here. You come to St. James and you might meet God there. And that's the point of a church, isn't it? It has to be a community where people are meet and transformed by the God revealed by Jesus. And the other thing would be to be generous in their support, financial support of St. James. It costs more money to do ministry than people expect. One of the things, and I'm sure, Kate, you hear this occasionally, why does it cost so much to do whatever? Yeah. And the answer is it just does. And the church manages most of the time to be pretty economical about it. But I find myself I find myself in lots of cases, someone spent $3 million to renovate their storefront, and what I could do with $3 million in the church.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that renovating your business is not unimportant. It is, but
right.
Those are the four things I would want to point out to people. And behind all of that, in the background, is really my conviction that what we need as individual human beings, as church, the body of Christ, the mystical body of Christ, and what our country certainly needs, is the transformation of life that happens when you meet Jesus. The dismissal that we often use, depart to love and serve the Lord. the Lord who loves and has always and continues to serve us. It's a matter of imagination. It's a matter of how you view life. I think we need to be intensely serious about saying, I see life through the lens of two lens, cross and resurrection of Jesus, which are the testimonies, the great testimonies to the commitment of God to us and the power of God's commitment to transform anything, even death. That's why I'm in this. That's why I'm a Christian. That's why I bother. I could have made a lot more money doing almost anything than what I did, and made it easier. Being a priest or a bishop is not easy work. I know it looks like it's easy to some people. What is it you do all week long? There are times when I've wanted to slap people, oh, you only work on Sunday. And the answer is, if you only knew about the other 50 hours that has gone into this week.
You know what?
And the average cleric works 50 hours a week, by the way.
Yeah, it's and it's a joy. And it's a joy.
That's why you do it.
And that's why we do it. And what you're talking about, cross and resurrection, it's the way to life. I mean, that's the great news that we have for people, that there's this way of living, of being alive, that that we experience in our relationship with Jesus, in our Christian walk, however you want to talk about it. And it's everything. I mean, everything looks different, through these lenses. So that is why I'm so excited about the future at St. James, because I think we really have that going on, in this place. And
St. James is now a great congregation, but it's only just started. If people will sort of step up and say, I have been blessed by Jesus Christ and by the church, which is the body of Christ. And if we can put feet and hands to that, there's no reason why we can't change our ministry area in a city that desperately needs it. We know about the poverty, the homelessness. We know about the brutality, the corruption, and maybe at some level just the racism, the mendacity, and just the plain ugliness and banality of so much of modern life. That people are living on breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs, entertainment. Well, you know what I'm talking about. I'd have to tell too many stories to kind of fill it out.
We're over by 15 minutes, and we have to stop. We have to stop ourselves.
Oh, shame on me.
It's no. I love it. I feel like these last 15 minutes have been the deepest part, and I'm so grateful. I love the way that you talk about Jesus. I think if those of us who've never really known a bishop up close before, we might think of them as I don't know. formal, but you're so real in the way that you talk about your relationship with Jesus, and I love that.
Thanks. It would be easy. It would be easy as a rector too to kind of fall into a role and
Mm-hmm.
fake it,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you get tired. But
Yeah.
you have to keep it real, and the only way to do that is prayer, worship, the sacrament of the altar, being
Mm-hmm.
with other Christian people who can nourish you. And then that's the feast. It's not breadcrumbs, it's a feast.
It's a feast. It's a feast. And you've brought so much to this feast. Thank you so much. Thank you for moving to Los Angeles. Thank you for giving St. James a chance and sticking around. Thank you for marrying so wisely the amazing Sue Brookhart. Thank
And
you
she
for
is.
all the ways that you encourage so many of us at St. James. Really, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be with you this evening. It's been an honor. Thank you, Kate.
Good night. And good night, everyone.
Peace.
Blessings.